Hey everyone, and welcome to the Painters Motivating Painters review for September. This month we have a lot of lovely entries in the single figure category, so in the interest of time, we're just going to launch straight into it. The first one I have here is Ainsley Inns. It's a converted Skaven tentacle rat dude. Looking for feedback on focus and finish and just general stuff as well. It's really cool. I like the conversion. I think it's really well painted, especially for just like a basic Skaven guy. Um, it's got a nice bit of variation in the weapon, and the skin is very good, I think. You can kind of see that there's fur texture and there's bits of skin and poking out in the ears and the snout and that kind of thing, which is very subtle, but it's got a very good level of detail as well. I think the tentacle conversion looks good itself. Um, the way it joins onto the body, it's a little bit so it's like kind of obvious that it is an arm that's been replaced by a tentacle. Because if you think about a tentacle, like it looks like it has an elbow in the middle of it. So if the halberd was kind of pointing out more to the side and the tentacle was kind of flowing around it, it'd look a bit less like an arm that you had turned into a tentacle. But that's like it's a very minor thing to be honest with you. I think it looks good, and the way you painted it looks very good, and the way the paint kind of transitioned to the arm ties in quite nicely as well. The only other thing on the finish of it, the base has a lot of kind of overhang around the sides, which and it's not super even. It looks a bit like it was a circle and you cut it and then you spread it open, so you have a kind of a bigger circle with a bit missing out on top of a circle, and it's kind of obvious. And also, there's a lot of it's quite thick. The actual piece of tile or whatever it is in scale, you got to think about that would be like, this much thickness of whatever piece of ground that he's standing on. Um, and then with the kind of liquid under it, it's quite a drop, which you might not want in all your bases for your guys. Um, but I really like the scars on the eye, and the way the eyes kind of like popping out like that, and like other little details like the pustules around the face and things. And I think it's extremely well painted for a basic kind of Skaven guy. It's a good job.
Alex, you want to say anything there?
Yeah, just the only thing that I think didn't get mentioned was the metals. I really like how they've been sort of weathered and things, sort of getting those different sort of textures on there and the different sort of types of weathering as well. It feels a little bit my sort of comment there was it feels a little bit too uniform. Metal is a little bit random. It's nice to have any sort of weathering is not quite as uniform as we as humans like our brains like to make us try to paint. It's just a bit more sort of randomness. It can be a bit tricky. An easy way for that is just to sort of I find is rather than working in one area, dotting about and jumping between different areas you're weathering, so that your brain doesn't really focus on one thing long enough to start making patterns. Um, but yeah, sort of it's mainly focused in the right kind of areas in the right ways. Just a little bit too uniform there, but overall I think it's a really nicely done sort of little dude here.
Yeah, totally agree. Other than what's already been said, I thought that the colours of the metals with the weathering and the rat dude himself are actually pretty close in colour most of the time. But that's quite believable, so that's not a problem. I just think that separating things out a bit sharper would help define the volumes, make it a little bit easier on the eye to pick out what's where. And then the other thing I think you could maybe push the highlights a little bit more on the top of the model because it's sort of very uniformly highlighted. And it looks like you've got some green stuff in the stone because it's like sewery and rotten and mank. So that's nice, but I think you could probably take that a little bit further. And that would be a really strong place for it then. But yeah, overall, I love what you did with it and have this cool purple tentacle thing. It's a cool idea. So well done, Ainsley. So let's move on up next then. They've got an awesome submission here from Ross. Very proud of this guy. Should be. I would be. Would love thoughts on what to try next and what looks best. He thinks he's dialing in a style. So I'll start by with the armor, which I think looks really, really cool. Tough color to paint, and you've done it very nicely, picking out the edges, treating each little facet of these angular armor plates as individual volumes and shading them properly. So nice work there. What else do I have? Great work on the gore and the splatter. It's quite a lot. It's pretty moody, but I like it. So personally, I think that's a win there with the Uhu glue or whatever you've used for the stringiness of it. That's really cool. If you want to make it look a bit fresher, you can also stipple in some black while the blood for the blood god is still wet. That gives it that really kind of deep, like liver blood essence to it. So yeah, it's something to try for next time. Not loving the blue skull, to be honest, though. It's a bit of a distraction compositionally. If you had maybe some of the flowers that were like a pale blue, that would maybe balance it a little bit, because there's not really much opportunity for that blue anywhere else on him. And then again, the flowers are the only instance of that purple. So maybe you could have swapped that around. And obviously yellow, blue, perfect color combination as well. So just a thought for that. And then the only other thing I had really was the small details on it are kind of lacking a little bit. So things like the rivets have not been picked out particularly. So have a crack at that. And I wasn't sure whether the eyes had been done. It looks like he's kind of like blind. If that, it might just be the picture. I'm sorry if it is, but it looks like, you know, if there is a pupil there, it could be bigger, and that will help sell the attitude of the face. So yeah, maybe a little bit of weathering on the armor, but again, optional. So, but all in all, lovely submission. And file down the rim, man. Just tidy up this rim. Got lots of detritus and stuff that's been painted over. So if this was display, you'd definitely want to tidy up that rim. If it's tabletop, meh. Yeah, nice one, Ross. Matt.
Yeah, I think it's really good. Like Jim said, I think in terms of getting a style, it definitely has a very distinctive style to it. So you're doing well there. The only little comment I have is that the bone on the T-Rex head looks great, but the straps are very similar in tone to it, and also kind of very similar to the whole piece. Maybe if you had them be blue, it would kind of work better with the kind of balance of the blue over the piece, even if it's kind of makes sense for them to be like bandages or whatever. Like they could be dyed. It maybe blue is his second favorite color. You know, you could come up with an excuse for it, but it looks great.
Yeah, and just like the other thing for me is I think the blue, it's not it is that little bit distracting. I think it's not the biggest deal, just because you do have this blue on his like loinclothy thing that slightly balances it, and on the sort of buried shields, but it is so much brighter than the others. You could work a blue in there with if it were toned back to match the other shades, is the main thing there. You've got three instances of the color, but they're very different sort of chromas and very different sort of saturations. And just on the biggest thing for me that stood out that's not already been mentioned, I really like the basing in general. That sort of lots of little bits of tufts. When people put just one or two on, it doesn't look natural. It just looks like it's just been stuck there. Cover it of tufts is always a good thing to do. I think it looked really, really nice. Not too planned. But the shields, for me, they look like they've been built up to be sort of buried under there, as if they've been there for quite a while. And they're not that dirty though. So if something's been sort of buried under been somewhere on a sort of battlefield or whatever so long that it's proper stamped into the ground to that extent, just dirt, some just some brown wash you shoved on there, letting it pool so that you get coffee staining and it looks like it's sort of built up, caked up mud or whatever. Just to sort of weather it that little bit more. It looks a bit too pristine, as if someone's just taken a bloodied and battered shield that someone's just taken off their arm and shoved it into the ground, rather than it's something that's been worked in there. But that's just a small sort of nitpicky thing. Just to sort of, it was just the really the main thing that stood out to me is anything that was sort of less nice on that base, because it is a very nice base. I really like it. I really like how naturalistic it is. But yeah, no, I think it's a nice piece. So now, if my thing will load, we go on to Adam Filier's little guy, sort of working on atmosphere and OSL, and just sort of looking for feedback on that and the piece in general. So for this, I think I think your sort of tone overall. I think you've hit a good atmosphere here. It is quite dark and grungy. I think it works well, but almost to the point that all the tones are very very similar. I think that you've got a pretty much black grey earth with a black grey cloak, and then sort of a dark brownish, desaturated brown grey sort of staff. Really, the only places where you've got other color are in the skin, where you've got that blue tone, but still quite desaturated, and on your little bits of OSL. So I think it does tend to all blend into one a little bit. Not so much that you can't tell where there is sort of separation of details, but just a little bit too much that it feels a bit samey to the eye. It's hard to find a point of focus besides this sort of skull in his hand where you've got this green OSL going on. And on the OSL, I think for sort of trying it out, especially sort of for the sake of selling atmosphere, it's good. It's sort of moving on the way, but like you say, you pointed out yourself, and it's always good to self-reflect. It's not quite hitting it, just because you it's pretty much there, but you don't have this bright point in the middle. So you've got it better on the eyes than on the skull, where it feels like some of the OSL is just the same value as the where it looks like it's meant to be coming from his eye sockets on that skull, but in his hand. But that doesn't feel brighter. It doesn't feel like that's the light source. It looks almost as though something's glowing onto the skull, not the skull glowing itself. So you just want to pop up the value, prop up the saturation as well on the eye sockets themselves, where you want that source to be. A good way is literally just dot some white on there and then glaze your OSL color over it, so it's just naturally brighter, so that it just sort of pops out as a more distinctive light source. On his, as I say, on the figure himself's eyes, it sells a lot better, because you do have that bright sort of sclera just sort of glowing out. I think that's a really nice successful attempt there. But it still feels like it dies off just a little bit too quick. You've got light, and then no light. We want that fade off. Light does die off quite quickly. It has that inverse square rule, but not quite as sudden as you got there. Would sort of help to just feathering out those edges. And I think you've also gone, by the looks of it, for the sake of atmosphere, a little OSL, almost like a candlelight type glow coming up onto the base. I think that's really nice. I think that sells pretty well. I think it's a really nice effect there. So it's almost as though he's in darkness and you've got that in light, which also to me helps make that all of his tones being similar make more sense. It helps justify that. But the base in general, to me, it looks a little bit like you've just got a pile of cork that you've stuck him on top of, or bark or something. So just a variety of textures there, and sort of, if it's meant to be rock, some crevices, some different tones, just to bring that out a little bit more, so it looks less like what you've made it out of, and more like what it's meant to be. But overall, I think it's really nice. Jim?
Yeah, you pretty much took all my points there. Lovely work with the freehand on the scroll. That's really cool. Nice work there. The texturing on the wood doesn't really sell particularly great because it's kind of just edge highlighted. So you need to be. Vince has got some great videos on how to do like faux wood graining, but basically, you paint the thing grey, and then you do lots of black dots and lines, vary them as random as you can be, and then you do white lines just to the side of it, kind of like you're doing battle damage, and then you glaze the whole thing with greens, browns, reds, whatever you fancy, to give it that graining and variation. So give that a go next time you have a swipe at wood. I think the lower stuff looks better, sells better. Above his hand, it doesn't really look like wood, to be honest. And you can clearly do it because you've done the texturing so nicely on his garment. I don't know what it is, robe thing, cape. So yeah, you can see you're getting some really tiny, thin brush strokes on there and on the skin as well. So you clearly can do it. Yeah, that's it from me, Matt.
Yeah, I think it's a really, you guys more or less covered it. It's a really nice looking piece. Definitely has some nice atmosphere to it. and we're like just trying out RSL. He did really well. Especially, I like the kind of yellowish cast that's on all the skulls stuff. Makes him look way more interesting than just kind of plain white skulls. But it's always tricky to get these kind of lighting effects, and I think it's definitely going the right direction. So fair play, keep it up. Then we'll pop on up to Matt Cook with this Reaper Fire Giant. I think this is really cool in that, like, to me, she looks kind of like a dwarf, but obviously she's a giant. But it's like she looks like a 75 mil scale dwarf, whereas she's meant to be like a 28 mil scale giant. So swapped out the spear. I think the hammer definitely looks a lot better, and it does generally read as like she is some sort of smith and or priestess with all the kind of amulets and stuff she's got on. So great job, kind of composing the piece altogether. I think the eyes look fine. Like they could maybe be a bit better, but if it's Reaper bones, um, they're not necessarily having the best kind of symmetry in their sculpt sometimes because the plastic's a bit soft, so they can get a bit weird on you. So I don't think there's anything really wrong with them. Uh, Skin's very bright, which is fine because she's like a pale person who's indoors all the time. But it does look quite similar everywhere. So like the skin tone on her face is the exact same skin tone down on her arms, which you're not really going to see on people. So you could either make one of them pale, like the inside of her arms could be paler and have like some sort of like very faint blues or reds added in for venation or something, or you could pop up the face just to make it more interesting looking. And you could have some kind of outlining as well on some of the elements, like her like bracer thing she's got on her arms, just to make them slightly more distinct from the flesh around them. The wire on the hammer, I think the hammer looks really good. The wire looks a bit out of scale because it's got this thing where you've bent it around, it's got a gap in between it and the kind of hexagonal face of the hammer, which wouldn't happen in a like if the hammer was real big because the wire would just lie flat against it much more easily. So if you could like hammer that flat, it would look less like it's just copper electrical wire and more like some sort of like reddish like rope or whatever she has put around it. The tiles, I like them. They look a little bit sci-fi-ish, but also for this kind of like if she's like a metal priestess, it also kind of works for that. I like that. And it's cool that you made it out of scrap stuff. And also yeah, the anvil, like it's super awesome that you like actually made that, like machined it out of aluminium. But it looks very like it is aluminium. Which is weird because obviously an anvil's made of steel. So I'd like expect it to be a lot darker than that. And it doesn't. So I paint a good bit of it. Like it's cool that it's looking like it's natural material, but like no one would have an anvil that looks like that. It might be nice to have some bits that would be super bright if it's like a magic anvil or something like that. But at the moment, it's looking like it is a piece of it's an aluminium anvil. Um, and yeah, I think like the plinth and everything, like it looks quite well, and it's doing a whole little scene as well altogether. So fair play. Thanks, man, for submitting.
Yeah, just to add on to there, with the sort of added on pieces, I think it is definitely a better composition with the hammer than a sort of bendy spear. But I know bones can be a tough material to work with, but I would sort of all the pieces that you've machined and added on there, like the anvil and the sort of tiles, it looks like they're still just the raw materials, not painted. So just sort of a lick of paint on there to make them fit in with the sort of the way that the model's painted. It's just a very jarring sort of things that are raw materials and things that are painted. It just feels a little bit disconnected there. And the only other thing, honestly, I think the skin tone. I think it would look if she's meant to be a blacksmith. It'd be nice to see some like soot or stuff on there, sort of messying up the skin tone. Sort of I don't I don't necessarily know how blacksmithing works. I don't know if it how messy it is, but definitely in my head, and I think in sort of portrayals on TV and stuff, that a lot of people are going to be if they see a piece like that, expect to see very dirty, sooty people who have been working in forges or wherever. So sort of a bit of sometimes, even if it's not necessarily realistic, I'm sure that there is dirt flying around, but even if it's a very sort of a lot cleaner than it's portrayed in media, it's sometimes it's nice to step away from the realism and lean into what people would expect to see, because for that sort of artistic interpretation. So some of that might be nice. A good example of how that can be achieved, because I wouldn't know how to start with that. But Roman Lapat's recent bust of like the Connor model has a lot of that on it, and it looks really really nice. So that sort of essentially weathering the skin, so to speak, would look really nice here for the character and the story that you're trying to build there. But yeah, no, I think overall you've done a really nice job.
Only thing left for me to say then would be the metals that you did paint could do with some more shading and highlights. So if you look at the bronze trim of her armor breastplate, you could definitely bully some deeper tones in there, some shadows, and then pick out highlights as well, like towards the edges that are facing up, on top of the chest piece as well. And then if you look down at the foot, another good example is these bands that are around her ankles. That's all they're very much the same colour. So yeah, I realise there's a lot of it there, but you've got to push the contrast on these metals to really sell them a little better. Everything else has kind of been mentioned before, but it's a very cool conversion and it is looking pretty good. Just keep on pushing, man. Thanks for submitting, Matt. All right, next up is Carl with a Gloomhaven mini. So he likes how the copper and bronze came out. As well as the abs and the lighting on the shield. It's interesting what would be the next level to do on this, and any thoughts on the fur cape. He, like all people ever, struggle with crap casted fur capes, so we're going to have the same chat again about fur capes. Tried to add some colour variation to the base with wet blending, but I'm not sure it came out very well. So we'll start with the cape then, get it out of the way. I think you've got a nice amount of variation in there. That looks a lot better than some that I've seen. It is quite glossy, so matting it down may help. The only other thing you can really do with capes like this is paint a pattern in to make it more interesting, or have it like lighter at the top, like pale fur, and then moving down into like browns and blacks. Nature is your best example for this, so go and look at some cool fur patterns. Like brindle pattern on dogs is an awesome pattern for fur. Obviously you could have done any pattern you like, make it up if you like, but yeah, good examples already exist in nature, so check it out. But I don't think you did a bad thing with the cape at all. So then moving on, I'll talk about the shield. So I like the lighting, the NMM style lighting that you've done on the shield. That's pretty cool. So you go like 5 is your deepest shadow, 1 to be in the brightest highlight. So I think you could put more of your brightest highlights in here, but it is on the whole selling, I think. You could just push the edge highlights a bit further and broaden the area where the brightest highlight is in all areas. Battle damage, not so handsome. It's a little bit, I don't like using the word, but sloppy. So these need to be thinner, crisper lines to really sell, and also vary the size of them. They're all very much of a muchness in terms of the size of them. So I'd have like maybe one that was that big, and then the rest of them would be all the way down to just like tiny little dents and scratches, almost as tiny as you can get it. That would really help. Right idea, just a little cleaner application to improve that. It does take practice, it is tricky, but great shot at putting it in there. Move around to the front then. So I think the skin looks pretty decent on this guy. I think you could maybe push the deepest shadows a bit further, like under his arms here. And in that armpit there, maybe under the neck. It's nice tones that you've got going on in there, but just in the very deepest shadows, just push it a little bit more. And I think the texture's supposed to be there on this guy, so nice one for that. It just needs a bit more separation. There is some lines that are quite dark, but there are others where it's kind of missing, like around this cuff and like around these feathery things on his head as well. The teeth, I think, don't paint teeth like your highest brilliant white. No teeth is white, and if they are, then they're fake. And I don't think this guy's got fake teeth so much. So pick a bone color for that, whether it's through Shabdi or you get an elfic flesh. I think from Vallejo is quite a good one. Screaming Skull, something like that. Very much like what you've done with these knee pad things. but not quite as dark as these because he's been shaded heavily, as well they should be. Nice NMM on the sword. I think it's selling quite well, and the blood effects. That's quite cool. And the only other thing I had was the tufts don't look like they've been painted. Maybe this one had some wash chucked in it. But they just, I think you could go a little bit further on working some desaturated tones into those, just to bring it in. And then, as I said before, I think it also looks a little bit glossy in darker areas. So, yeah, a varnish would really help with that. Or just allow me a medium clear, nothing else in it, just allow me a medium, slap that on, and that would really help. But yeah, on the whole, good contrast to it, nice volumes. I like the scheme of everything, and textures and stuff are picked out differently. So yeah, I think you did a great job with it. And I think you maybe hand painted those cracks on there as well. So that's really cool if you did that. Nice. Matt, I think next, yes.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I really like the color palette for the base and how it ties in with the bronze coppery accents into the figure. It sells this kind of desert nomad kind of look, and the fact that he has a cold tone of skin that it contrasts with all the other stuff, like it really frames him nicely. So that was like an excellent color choice.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I mean, fur's hard to paint. I've painted this model, and the details aren't great. I mean, most board game models, the details aren't great to begin with. So, I wouldn't worry about that, to be honest. It's not a big deal. What you've done with it looks like a really good sort of attempt at what you've been given to work with. The only thing that sort of I picked up on is there's a few places where you've got either some overspill of the color of a different area onto other places, or where your dark lining is really sort of thick lines, to the point that it's more than just a recessed shade and it looks almost like a rim, a sort of a dark rim around things. So it's just that sort of cleanliness of brushwork and brush control, just sort of that fine tip brush going in and being really sort of gentler and delicate around where sort of areas meet, just sort of tidying things up. But brush control and sort of that sort of cleanliness work is something that just comes with time. The more you paint, the better it gets. There's not really a way to improve that unless you're holding your brush like this, in which case it's probably good to change your grip. But if you're using holding your brush in a comfortable way for you and things, it's just practice. I think the cracks on the base just feel a little bit. I think they are painted on. They feel a little bit thick for me. So again, thinner lines there. Or there's a variety of crackle sort of pastes and products and things that can do that same effect. Perhaps a little bit more convincingly for sort of the style of painting and things. But overall, I think it's a nice sort of little model. I think particularly for a gaming model, you've done a really good job with that. So moving up now to Matt, I believe. Hi.
Floating heads.
Yeah,
Well,
we're floating heads. Oh, and torso for Jim. Sorry.
We'll go with it. Weathering on the cloak. Too hard on the white highlights around the face. Flag or no flag, and new and improved snow. I'm gonna have to keep referring back to this. So weathering on the cloak, I think it's nice. You've got sort of nice texturing there. It works well. It sells as a weathered fabric, or that artistic interpretation of it. And the sort of painting down the bottom to make it look like it's been dragged through the mud and things. I think that's really nice. I think for me, it's almost too well blended, or in the sense that when Thunk's been dragged through mud and things, it's there is a bit of a fade where it sort of soaks into the fabric and has almost like a slight fade out, but it's usually quite intense, very small area fade and then fabric. where you've just got lots of mud, unless it's meant to be sort of a very, very, very light sort of more of dirty water than dragged through mud. Which, given that you've got a snow base, could be the case. Um, I would just like a tiny bit more there, but that could also be easily be a personal preference thing. Um, on the face, I think the sort of white highlights, I think it's not an issue. I think they work nicely. It helps sell that reflectivity and those sharp sort of edges, give it a little bit more definition. I think the volumes could have maybe been um, brought out just a little bit more, if not even more areas of that high highlight, just to help bring the focus in. It's quite a desaturated palette, so that would help to pop that out a little bit more. Flag or no flag? Honestly, I think both are nice. I think the flag is a really nice way. I think this freehand on there is really nice. So it feels almost as though you want it to be there to show that off. But and I think it also does help to frame it a little bit. It is very tall though. I don't know if that's a stock part in that height, but or if that's some sort of conversion or addition you've made. But it is very, very tall to the point that it feels like it makes it off balance in terms of the composition there. A little bit for me. My eyes keep, because it's a straight line going right up, and that creates sort of this vertical eye line vector that's sort of pulling your attention upwards. If it were maybe half that length, I think it would be a definite yes. With it as it is, depending on what the piece is for, gaming piece versus sort of more for fun piece, I think it would be honestly an up to you choice of what you prefer. I think either way looks fine. Just it definitely helps frame the face, but it is quite tall. As for the snow, I like it. That wet sort of settled, starting to melt snow is it looks really nice, and the sort of parts that are a little bit more dusty, a bit more blown up against the side of things, it looks a lot more naturalistic, and really sort of fits with sort of the way you've got everything else going in there. I think it's a lot nicer than sort of previous snows we've seen. I think it's definitely moving in that right direction. If you're looking for sort of moving on with that, if it's meant to be melty, like as in like settled there. So I think at the moment it can read as one of two things: light dusty snow that's just settling, or snow that's been there for a while and starting to melt. Either one works. If it's meant to be light and dusty and just there, then some a little more of just a loose scattering of it just around in a few other places to make it sell as that sort of dispersed snow a bit more. If it's meant to be melty, then it's a hard thing to do, but making it look wet around the edges, as if it's a bit of snow in the middle of a puddle of water sort of thing. I'm not sure what the easiest way to achieve that would be, besides maybe a very, very slight bit of sort of an epoxy resin sort of water effect or something like that. Or, to be honest, it's such a small area and such a shallow amount of water, just some gloss varnish. But overall, I think it's nice, and the snow is very nice. Jim.
Yeah, I think this snow's looking better as well for all the previously mentioned reasons. Nice one. With the cloak weathering, I thought that looks pretty damn good. Maybe on the fold that was you'll see where my cursor is when you look at it. But the striations are kind of going down the cape as a kind of like across the ridge of the material, if you see what I mean. So I think it sells a little bit better when it goes across the ridge. In that particular instance, banner or no banner, I don't think it's much of an issue, because this is a gaming piece. It's part of an army, isn't it? So when you see the whole army, like standard bearers are quite an eye-catching piece, and it's a lovely bit of freehand that definitely needs to be shown off. So for those reasons, banner. Love what you did with the skull. It was on the top as well. Did you paint that plate fracture in by hand, or was that like a micro pen or something? Because that looks really, really cool.
Skull.
Yeah, the skull that's on the top of the spear.
Oh no, that's sculpted in.
Oh, is it? Ah, well.
Yeah, it's
Either
a
way.
very good skull.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. And wood graining as well. Super, super cool on that. Very cold wood. I think you pulled that off beautifully. What else did I have? The weathering in general looks good as well, so no issues there. Yeah, I think Alex covered everything else. Just a round of applause for the freehand, because I think that's probably the best freehand that I've seen you submit. So awesome, great job, dude.
No, thanks a million. And it's funny with the banner, like I didn't even think it was an issue until I started taking photographs, and then
Uh,
you're worried about the aspect ratio, and then suddenly you're like, oh yeah. Whereas, like you said, on the table, it's like
yeah,
whatever. She's a lady with a big banner. It's fine.
yeah, no, banner works for me, man, definitely. Sweet.
Cool, thanks. All right, we'll head up to Alexis Bonaire on Bellacor, another Chaos model. This is really cool. I'm not going to have too much pointers for you because I really, really like this. You kind of solved the Bellacor problem. Because the problem with Bellacor is he's like super boring because he's always done in like kind of gray. But you've made him look like he's all black and gray, but actually be really interesting with this kind of upglowing light. So that's great. And I really love how you have this central area at his head be like super bright and almost vignette like, really attracting attention in there. It's almost like the reverse Sin City effect. Like in Sin City, they have a dash of color to draw your attention, whereas here it's like, no, the white is what's really catching your eye. And the only thing you might maybe have a few more highlights on stuff like the little spiky things that are on his wings, not up to that extent, but just because they create like a frame around the model, so you won't be detracting attention if you bring them up to like 80% of that brightness. It'll just create a bit more interest scattered around. The chains and stuff, I think you've done a good job of not making them attract too much attention because this is a really, really busy piece. So I think that's really good. The back doesn't have the same kind of focal element to it. So if it's for a display piece, that's probably not really an issue at all. If it's for gaming, like 50% of the time you're looking at the back. So maybe if even some of the spines along his back were like white instead of black, or if he had like some sort of tattoos or runes or something etched into his shoulders, just to have a central thing to look at on the back. Because like it's all nicely painted, but it's all like there's no one thing that kind of stands out there. And I think the flaming sword you've done well. Flaming swords are one of my triggers. This one is a nice looking one. Um, but the lava on the base is hot glue and looks like hot glue. And anyone who looks at it, who knows what hot glue is, knows that it is hot glue. I'm afraid. So I think hot glue is fine for like building. It's the nice thing about it is it does drip and it gets that natural kind of flowy effect to it. But you don't want to leave it with the hot glue finish because it's just so distinctive looking. So if you put something like crackle paste over it, or like even one of those ground textures, and you could even do like, paint it to quite a bright color, like an orangey red, and then put like a dark crackle paint or whatever over it to have this kind of broken crust of lava. Because lava is very odd in the way it moves, and that it's like solidifies on the outside, and then look at some pictures of volcanoes. They're very interesting. Um, but that's it. Really, that's my only thing. I think the Space Marine is picked out well, but doesn't attract too much attention, and it's generally one of my favorite Bellacors I've seen. So great work.
Yeah, honestly, a lot of the same things. I really like this sort of inversion of the sort of spot color with it. Not a spot color; it's a spot lack of color. It works really well, honestly. It's a very very unique take on sort of not just this model but color scheme in general. I think it works phenomenally well. My sort of two things. The sort of the OSL for me. Um, I think it works in most places. It feels like it's a little bit heavy on the bottom of the wings though. In that because you don't have a sort of obvious light source. So I think it's meant to be just the general glow of the lavary hellish scape below. You can sort of get away with having things have different intensities in different places, but it feels like if the only place that it looks like the glow might be specifically coming from, as I say, is from the generic below. So I'd expect his sort of feet and legs and things to be quite bright, but it feels like the bottom of his wings are sort of more intensely sort of lit up than say where you've got the glow on the bottom of on the undersides of his legs and things. So I would sort of that stands out to me as it feels like there's a slight disconnect there in terms of the light source. And the metal one is sort of like 5 plate, I guess. I genuinely I can't tell if that's NMM or TMM shaded in an NMM style, which is a good thing. Whichever way round that is, it means you've hit it very well. I would again just on the OSL though, it's meant to be a reflective surface, so I'd pop out the highlights even more there, because whatever light is bouncing off the leg next to it, that metal is going to be bouncing even more than that. So just popping the NMM there, sorry, the OSL there. It's a thing that a lot of people don't consider. They just sort of spray a load of glow everywhere. But the reflectivity of the materials that you're hitting off of is something that can take good OSL to great OSL, sort of thing. But overall, I think it's a really, really cool piece, and a version of this model I'm not going to forget in a while.
Absolutely agree. It's stunning. Really well done, Alexis. I'm going to give you one thing that I really, really love that's not been mentioned, and one thing that I think could be improved. So I'll give you the improvement first. I think with the glowy, pustule, boiling, lavary bits, some of the bubbles are like really bright and they look awesome. Some are really dark, and I don't really get why that is, because it seems to all be running out at the same time. So it seems like you've got hot spots, but then they're really, really cool in other places, and I don't think that reads as well as having them all hot and then some which are super intensely hot, which would then help sell this red glow from underneath. So that's that bit, and then the bit that's not been mentioned that I absolutely love is this little fire. I don't know if that's sculpted. I don't ever remember seeing it. This sculpted fire on the marine, which depicts a fiery death by that very fiery sword. If that is part of the sculpt, then I haven't seen anyone do it as nicely as you have, I don't think. So beautiful, beautiful work, all in all. Maybe, one other thing, maybe a little bit too much black on the ends of these flames. I'd have a little bit more red, save the black for the very, very tips. Whereas you've got like 50% of these flames in some places are black. So scale that right back. A little improvement from the sword. But the hot spots on it are beautiful. So yeah, again, well done, Alexis. Awesome stuff. Thank you for submitting that. Okay, moving up to Bilkins, and this time it's a model of a gypsy woman, 3D printed in 32mm scale. So she's trying to go for OSL and atmosphere building other than zenithal lighting. So can we evaluate the Larkdight ambience, the OSL on the cards, and the skin tone, and about the photos? I don't think the photos are too bad. We'll start there. It's all in focus. There are some very, very deep and powerful shadows, but there's not much cast on the base, so it looks a little bit dimmer from the back, but that might be deliberate because the atmosphere that you're setting. So again, I don't think that's a photo issue at all. For the OSL on the cards, first thing I noticed was that that's lit on that side and that side. So on the back, the card faces are lit, but on the front, on this right hand, it's not, and I didn't really get why. So I think if you lit that up, because she's clearly got magic fingers or whatever, and she's casting some sort of spell with the cards, I think this one should be lit. It also gives you a very nice opportunity for OSL underneath the arm. But in general, I think you're doing pretty well with the OSL. You could maybe have the very center of it a bit brighter just to help sell it. So you've done it on the backs a lot better. I think this is the most successful glow on her back right arm. But yeah, on the front one, just a little bit brighter in the center. I think you're in a strong place there. I love what you did with the fabrics on her head and her chest. There's a little bit too much of the deepest shadow though in the blue of the flowing red dress. There's a lot of your deepest shadow, an awful lot of it. So save that and have some more mid-tones in a lot of these folds. Yeah, because it does look very like that. There needs to be a little bit more travel in the blue. The texture's there, and that's really nice. But it's kind of 1, 2, 3 colors in most places, 4 on the highest highlights. So just broadening that spectrum to having your 5 variations, and save all this dark. So it's kind of like skin islanding that happens. Not on yours, mind, but you don't need the deep shadow every time you do a transition. Save it for the volumetrics of the thing, and that will also help set the lighting ambience of it. But I think you did a really nice job with her face. This black hair here with this sheen to it is gorgeous, so well done there. The metals are all selling, so that's lovely. Lovely tone work in the foot. Could maybe go a little bit darker between the toesies. But in general, that's a really, really nice skin tone you've got going on. The green glow in the eyes is lovely touch as well, compositionally. So that's all looking really good. But then when we flip to the back, again, I'm not sure if it was deliberate because of the light mood that you're trying to set, but there's a lot less attention gone into the hair and also into the red here, the red sections of the wrist. I think it's deliberately like cast shadows, to be honest. I think that's what it is. But it's it's hard to say. It's like it's not deep enough in shadow, if that makes sense. They just look like more muted colors. It might be because the blue is not gone as dark as the red, so the red has gone a lot darker. You can see it here on this photo, but the blue is pretty much the same. So it's just a disconnect happening there between those tones. But all in all, I think it's really nicely done. It is beautifully painted, but yeah, just those few bits would knock it up a level or two. Matt, what do you think? You're still muted, sweetheart. Would you like to start again?
Yeah, I was just complimenting everything. Yeah, it's a very small fig. It's very detailed, so great job. And I like your color scheme and everything. I think the eyes could be a bit brighter just because on the frontal view, the main thing that I'm looking at is the card, whereas, I mean, the card should be the second most important thing. And it'd help, as Jim said, if you had the other card lit up. But also on that card, the Ace of Spades, if you freehanded on, oh, I assume you freehanded that on, it looks really good. But it's weird that I'm not sure if it's her finger is glowing and lighting up the card like Gambit, or if the card is glowing, because on her other hand, the card is glowing and casting light on her finger. If the card's glowing, the side of her finger that's on so this side of her finger shouldn't be as bright. Like some of it technically goes through your finger, but like I don't think we need that level of realism. Like it should be more like skin tone and then maybe like a slight glow on the sides of it. Because it looks a little bit like her fingers like melting into the card, which I don't think is what you were going for. And on the foot thing, could you pin her? You could just pin her. Don't forget, and pins you can always bend them, so you could put the pin like diagonally up into her foot, and then just bend it straight down to get it into the plinth. If you wanted. Sometimes I've been real cheeky with figures and put the pin straight through their foot and then just file it flat on the top. Be like, who cares? But yeah, it looks really good. And as you did it, whatever way you got it to work.
Yeah, and just one thing from me is just on the fabric, sort of slightly more sort of magentary sort of fabric over her chest. I'm not sure if you're going for like a sheer fabric there um, or or not. Just I think if you're going for the sheer fabric, you can push it. You can push it further. We want to see where at the tightest places where it's proper clinging to the skin. Um, just straight skin tone, not even with any real tint from the fabric, will really help to sell that a little bit more. If that's not the effect you're going for, and you're just going for a sort of a more opaque fabric, then again, just on that same sort of the keeping a bit more attention to the volumetrics and the sort of that almost islanding effect with the folds in there. Just it just sort of stands out to me as I can't quite tell which kind of fabric it's meant to be. Everything else I can sort of tell what materials you're going for, which is nice. It's always a good thing with fabrics. But just that one was the only place where I couldn't quite tell which you were going for. But besides that, I think the atmosphere sells really well. I think that's the biggest success here is the sort of slightly more dramatic lighting and the atmosphere sort of work. I think yeah, it's definitely moving towards that. If that's what you are sort of looking towards moving on, lean heavier into that. It's always nice to start on a shy approach, as you call it. Now's the time. Now that you know you can, and we know that you can sort of achieve that on a tentative approach. Just go all out and see what happens. It's easy to overdo it and then rein it back if you need to. You've been shy. Now almost try to overdo it and then you'll find your middle ground that'll be exactly right. So you can play with both sides. But yeah, I think it's really nice. Then we move up to CMD uh, with this little Necroarch guy. So just universal shadow color. Refresh myself from what we've got here. And so specific feedback on the cloak texture and the overall color choices. Um, and asking for a thing we don't like is always a good thing. I think it's the right perspective to have, not to just in a wider sense to everyone. To be honest, here, that's a very good mentality to have, because kind of the reason we do this is we give you that positive feedback to lift you up and tell you what we like, but also give you those sort of constructive critiques, and seeking that out is a fantastic thing, because that's how we improve. So looking at the piece in general, the cloak sort of textures and fabric textures I think work. I think we've got a very similar thing here on the little the magentary purple cloak, as we've sort of seen many times in the past with people approaching fabrics, where you've got that sudden transition from light to dark across the folds. Not every fold needs to be highlighted to the same level of highlight and shaded to the same level of shade. We just want that sort of volumetric approach to it. I find fabric very difficult to paint. I know a lot of people do. So one way to achieve that, I think you've done it a lot better on the sort of more bluish, sort of dark turquoise color you've got on the back here, where yes, you go to dark in most of the folds, but it reads more natural because you've got more. I think it's just because you've got more space there, you've got more mid-tone. So it reads as a natural approach there, and it's darker fabric in general. So I think for the front, just sort of having a bit more mid-tone in there, having an extra couple of levels of value to help spread that out, and make it save those really dark colors for the really dark areas. Um, so the something else that I quite like is the skin tone, the actual color palette of it. It's sort of in fitting with the sort of that almost analogous type scheme you've got. It works really well. It's really harmonious, and while still being distinct, it helps pull the focus right in. Even though you've got these purpley tones in it, in what's essentially a pinkish purple cloak, it still sort of pops out. Um, in and sort of working with a universal shadow color really helps in bringing everything together as well. I think you mentioned that. It's something that I like to do in my painting, is universal highlights and universal shadows. Not all the time. I think, like you said here, you've got different highlights, but the same shadows. That works, or the other way around, or using the same sort of starter highlight and then going in different directions from there. There's a few ways you can play with that idea, and I'd encourage you to experiment, because that's also a really good way to find things out. In terms of asking sort of something we don't like, the cowl around his head, you've got it in just sort of black here. I'm not sure what that's meant to be. I'm not sure what color, whether it's you're going for like a hood and a black sort of nothingness behind it or what. But to be honest, I think that's a limit of the model, not you. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. These really sort of old, sort of classic Warhammer sort of fantasy battle models from old Citadel models are just they're they come with their own quirks, shall we say? So I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's just but it is honestly the only part that stands out as sort of lesser. But to be honest, not because of you. But yeah, I think it's a really nice sort of go here. Jim?
Yeah, agree with all of the things. Use of a universal shadow color is cool, but in this case, the one thing that I don't like really is the purple shadow on the scroll. Doesn't seem very natural. I think that would be better if you just picked a normal sort of shade color for that scroll. It just stood out to me as just looking a little bit out of place. And then the thing that I like most about it, I think, is the texturing on the very small edges of the robe. That is very, very tough to do, and you've done it very, very nicely and paid great attention to it. The cape is also really, really nice as well. But yeah, just as Alex said, some more travel in those tones, and that would really, really punch this up a lot. So yeah, that's all from me. Matt?
Alright, so I don't like this really, really bright saturated green you have in like the bottles and stuff around his waist. I think they're painted really well, but I think it's a weird place to draw attention to. Um, because I do like the skull that's down by his left hand side. That looks like super awesome, and it's a cool like detail. And then you've got the skull on the top with the cool green gem in it, and then the green sword. So you're creating this like triangle that should be centering around the face, but because you've got the things around his waist, it's kind of like I don't know where I should be looking at exactly. So I think, um, like it just do one or the other. Like the gem looks really cool and the bottles look really cool, but maybe not have them both with this kind of transparent chlorine thing going on. But it's a cool looking model overall, and a familiar, even if we're not reviewing it. Okay, June BG. Thanks for taking the time to do this. Took second place in local art competition. Congratulations. Obvious question: what do you do to take home first? Okay, many caveats regarding competitions. Obviously, the best way to take home first is to poison all of your opponents, anyone who brings a better model, or pay children to sabotage the miniatures before they get reviewed. Because at the end of the day, you're not in control of what the competition brings. So, like, all you can ever do is bring your best, and it really depends on what competition you're in, and don't worry too much about it. Second place is great, and the fact that you're even competing in the first place is also great. So having said that, I'll be a bit nitpicky about various things because we're talking about it in kind of competition context. I think the mount that he's on looks really good. I like the kind of two. It has socks. Apparently they're called on horses, where its feet are like a light color, and then it's like a darker color up top. Um, uh, and the base also works well if you're in like a kind of local Games Workshop competition. It's got stuff on it, but it's not super complicated, and people can kind of get what it is. So I think and it uses the kind of elements that were in with the model. Um, so I think that's all good, and it's a really, really, really good model choice if you're entering a contest, especially for a Games Workshop based thing, which I don't know if it was, because it's got a lot of stuff going on, and that allows you to show off a lot of your techniques, and people will look at it and go like, even if it's nicely and cleanly painted, and it's a very complex model, people will kind of rate that a little bit higher than a basic model that is painted actually the exact same way. Um, so having said that, it is quite cleanly painted, but it's not like perfectly cleanly painted. Like we can see in some places, like on the beast's legs, there's that filigree pattern, and we can see there's wash has pooled in there in a kind of a weird way that it hasn't done in other places. And the same with the kind of scale mail on it. It's not super fully controlled. Um, and it's a tricky scheme, so that tends to happen when you do wash over white. So, but just be careful about going back in, tidying it up. That'd be a definite thing for point for improvement. Um, the face, I quite like it. I like the expression on it, and the shield. I think looks really good. It looks like the Hylian shield from Zelda or something like that. Um, but the white and the gold in some places look very close to each other, like especially on his face, like his skin tone, and then he's got like these white cheek pads, and he's got this gold around it, and it all kind of blurs it together a little bit because it's quite um, similar in town. And I don't know why some of the kind of ivory armor, like on the beast, is a little bit brighter than it is on his face, whereas really you should probably want that to be the area of maximum interest. So it should be if it's the same material, you want to make his face be lighter. Um, and the metal, I really like the finish of it. The way it's kind of like mottled looking. It looks almost like it's hammered metal, but I could say that other people wouldn't. They'd rather it be perfectly smooth. And it's not completely consistent. So, if I can look at it and say, well, you definitely were aiming for this kind of hammered metal finish everywhere, that's fine, or perfectly smooth. But if it's like a bit of both, that's kind of the only time you can objectively say in, a review of art, like, well, you were going for one of these things and it's fallen in between two stills. So just be careful with that. Um, the white and the cream could have more travel in it in terms of that. Like there's large rounded areas where the beast's shoulders, for example, where the lower side of it is pretty much the same as the top side with a bit of a recess shade. So kind of dividing that into having a slight tonal variation between them would be quite good. And I'm not sure in terms of the composition why there's this blue green color around the place because like you have blue and gold and white and red and blue green, and I'm not sure it's doing anything for the model. And if it's not doing anything, then it's not an improvement. It could be a disimprovement. And also, it's weird that you have the very light, like Andrea sky blue looking stuff on the bottom of the beast's kind of tabard thing. Um, Whereas that would look better if that was dark and it was only the light blue was all around the figure on top because they're trying to draw attention up to the rider rather than down there, and light colors attract attention more. Um, so yeah, other cool things you might like to try that people like in competitions is gems. So you have this solid kind of gem with the gloss finish on it. If you wanted to do translucent gems, there's loads of tutorials for that out there. They look really cool. People like them. It'll give you more points theoretically. And also freehand. People like seeing freehand to show that you can do freehand. Um, Whether or not a model with freehand is better or not is completely subjective, but some competitions they might be like, well, this has freehand and this one doesn't. Therefore, you're a better painter, which is kind of nonsense, but it's also a fun thing to try for yourself. Even just like a pattern on the cape, instead of it being just a color and the following the contours of the model. But great work. It's a complicated model. It's got a lot of details that you've picked out everywhere, and congratulations again on your second place.
Um, yeah, a lot of things said there and a lot to like agree with. I think there's not too much that you've left uncovered there, Matt. For me, I think something that I want to draw attention to is something that I really like is the blending on the blue fabrics and stuff. You've got a really nice sort of smooth transitions there. It's blues can be quite a difficult color to blend, just because of the way that blue pigments work. At least in outside of artist sort of acrylics, in our sort of hobby brands, where you pay the same price for every color, they're not gonna go for the really expensive sort of pigments that actually make blue nicer to paint and only but still charge the same price. So a lot of the time you're working with blues with lots of white incorporated into them that don't blend very well, but you've got these blended out quite nicely, quite smooth. It's not really doesn't really look chalky, which is a common problem with blues. Um, then I think the eyes are also really nicely picked out. There's a nice detail there. It's always nice to see sort of well placed and tidy eyes. That definitely helps at competition, but it also just makes things look nicer in general. Um, Something that in terms of like picking things up from second to first, there's a lot of places. Obviously, Matt's mentioned cleanliness, and that was my sort of main thing that I was thinking while I was looking at this piece. But the other one is you've got a lot of areas where you've got some. It looks like you've probably used a gloss wash on the metals to keep that shine there without sort of toning it down too much. Um, but it looks like there's quite a few places around the metals where that's sort of overspilled. So you've got glossiness on areas that should be matte, and that stands out to me as as soon as you see that little bit of glossy shine on areas that are otherwise matte, it can help break that sort of selling the illusion of a little tiny thing that is that material, rather than a little tiny painted figure. Um, and the other little thing from me in terms of with regards to metallics in particular is a good approach for competition, and just leveling up your NMM in general is rather than sort of painting it and then slapping a gloss wash over it, sort of incorporating matte paints into that sort of base tone and shading it down with that so that you get that sort of TMM painted in the NMM style, and that sort of type of shading rather than just having the recesses gather or wash, and it doesn't always look the most realistic, which is obviously depends on the competition always, but is almost always going to be a good way to push things up to a next level, just because it sort of mimics reality a little bit more, and it would also just be an easy way to remove that problem of sort of the gloss wash sort of spilling over in places. But overall, I think it's a really nice piece. I especially like sort of the sort of basing you've got going there. Again, it's a very Games Workshop base, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It is, after all, a Games Workshop model. So, yeah, congrats on the second place, and here's to future ones.
Yeah, I've got to say the same thing. There is no answer to how do I take home first, because if that guy didn't enter, you would have, you know. So just keep doing it. Just keep practicing. Keep getting better. Keep learning, and keep entering them. And then one day, hopefully, you will win one. But I think for my brief feedback here, just like the number one thing for it to go further at competitions is going to be the famous C word, contrast. I'm afraid the volumetric highlighting on it needs to go way, way further, especially as Matt mentioned on these white panels on the armor, on the mount, and just everywhere in general. It's best on the blue, it's worst on the white. So just to give you an idea there of what's working and what's not, you've got to push the shadows a lot further on a lot of this stuff to make it really stand out and pop. And then the second thing was the panel lining, which I think Matt mentioned, but it's just got to be hella crispy. It's got to be so thin. So you're on the right path, and there's no other way to get better at it than to practice. So yeah, that would be another major thing to really focus on. I would suggest would be to get these dark lines really thin. Okay, and really dark and matte as well. So I think you've used like an ink, like a black ink from this. I think Vallejo have got a black ink, and it's incredibly glossy. So mix it with some matte varnish or some other medium to give it a nice matte finish. But yeah, other than that, congratulations on second, and look forward to seeing more from you, June. Thank you very much. Right, next we have this cool looking vampire dude thing from Jeffrey. So trying to push the shadows and highlights, as well as continuing to work on this new painting technique, trying to improve the photos too. Okay, let's have a look. So photos wise, I think they're pretty sound. Can't really see much wrong with them. This one's maybe a little bit blurry around the foot, so to beat the blur, all you need to do is have your camera further away to focus on the whole mini, and then zoom in off afterwards. So in your post pick editing software, whatever it is, crop the image down. All right, if you're too close, then you will have areas that fall out of focus. But other than that, I think the quality's there, the details there. So yeah, that looks good. So I had for this one lovely colors in the skin, great variation, great volumetrics, shadows in nice places, highlights in nice places. Deepest shadow could maybe go a little more in some places. So I mean, it's better on this side of the face, like how dark that shadow is under that cheekbone, because he's turned away from the light. So you've actually resolved that really nicely, and how that contrasts with this knee. So this is, if June is still watching, which I hope she is, this is what I'm talking about, how bright this is versus how dark this section is under here. That's proper contrast, and it's beautiful. So well done, Jeffrey. Looks really good. What else did I have? The highlights look really good. You could maybe separate some elements a little bit more, just with some darker tones. I did not love, I'm afraid to say, the pink that's on the teeth. I think that would help separate the teeth from the flesh, because they are quite close in tone and brightness. So having that like a more plaquey kind of brown nastiness, I think would help differentiate them from the skin. They're just kind of melding together a little bit too much for me. Excuse me. The shoulder pad, I thought you could maybe take this lighting a bit further. So I think it's like an NMM like steel that you're going for here. So you're on the right lines with the contrast again, black to white, but they jump really, really quickly between each other. So you need to, it's better on the edges. Look, you've got like a transition going on there. So you need to like paint in some lines, like would originate in the center, and then the light would travel out towards the edge, and then smoothly blend it between the two. Secondary reflections, loads of videos how to do it, but these large areas of black are not helping the situation. What's highlighted is looking really good, and just to complete that NMM effect, you've just got to get rid of this black and smooth that out so it's looking more like light lines. Nice job working blue into the stone, and I think there's some green as well. It's kind of greenier on the back and bluier on the front, so nice work adding interest there. I wasn't sure why the pillar was purple though. That didn't really resolve. If someone's got an idea as to why that would be nice. But it's cool that it's there to add variation, but like stone isn't generally purple unless it's blatantly painted purple, which obviously this isn't. I mean, like the story is that the pillar is purple. So I couldn't really figure out why that was purple. And then the only other thing I had was nice work on this the cloth that's around his waist, but maybe you could add some texture to the ridges and high folds. That would be really nice as well. But overall, yeah, this looks really, really good. Love the lighting atmosphere that you put on it. Skin is by far and away the biggest success of it, and it is a giant success. So very well done. Oh, on the shadows, you've got very warm highlights. So the shadows that I said, push them darker, make them cold shadows. Warm highlights create cold shadows. So having like blues or like deeper purples would really, really set that off. All right, Jeffrey. Anyone else? Matt?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as an alternative to making the teeth kind of grungy and placky and mank, you could give them a really, really fine, really, really bright, like specular highlighter in the sides, like they're wet and catching the light. Because it's a vampire, it kind of makes sense for the teeth to be, you can think of the fangs in the darkness, kind of glinting there. And that would also maybe get rid of some of the pinkiness as well. If you used up that area with a few like kind of whiter dots, they'd resolve more from the skin around it. But it's a really cool looking piece.
Yeah, and just to add on there, I think specular highlights on the teeth is a really good shout. If you're doing that, a light line down based on the light direction, but also what a lot of people miss that's a tiny detail and not really super important, but something that can add a lot is also a little specular highlight running across the top as well, where the tooth would otherwise meet with the gum, because there is that slight ridge there where the gum sort of overhangs a little bit and then the tooth comes out just the tiniest bit. So catching that across there is one of those micro details that makes that one of those things that at arm's length you don't even notice, but then when you're looking up close, you're like, oh, they put that in. That's nice. Something a little bit sort of swarmy. I think that the skin tone is really nice. Overall the volumes are great, particularly on the back. But there's a few places like on his shoulder where you're just getting that little bit of muscle island thing still. Where I think you've gone for a volumetric approach and treating it as one volume with a light across it, but then you're still treating the muscle groups as so. Like here, on his shoulder is a lot brighter than lower down. That's fantastic, but you don't need to then still go to that deep shadow there. If your highlight here is a 1, your deep shadow can still be a 3 there, and that will work. That will read. You don't need to go all the way down to your 5. And the base for me, the stone. Nice variation in there. I'd personally like to see a little bit more, but that's a personal preference thing. I also think the base might be just that little bit too big for the model. That again, it comes down to personal preference, but for me, there's just that little bit too much negative space. I think mainly because that pillar is leaning backwards, so the figure has got this sort of figure leaning forward, but whilst with pillar leaning back, it sort of centers with sort of on that place, so that forward motion in the base isn't necessary there. It's just a little bit too much negative space for me, but that's a really sort of minor thing, you know. But yeah, I think it's a really nice sort of generally successful piece, particularly with sort of the shadows and highlighting volumetrically and stuff. So moving up, we get to Keeks, who I think we're jumping up to the top of the group where we've got a sort of another piece submitted here. Sort of that first one was more of a whip, and this one's actual model to be entered, a little bit sort of more on the complete side. So not sort of anything specifically asked for to look at. So just going in general. Um, Overall, I think that you've done a nice job of sort of rendering the volumes. I think that his sort of trousers work really well, sort of volumetrically and sort of having that nice contrast, especially working in that more desaturated palette. I think the boots are really nice, where you've got that slight glossiness to them, but not so much that you lose the black. It still reads as a slightly glossy black rather than sort of grey to me, which is always a difficult thing. White and black are notoriously difficult colours to paint, so I think that's a nice success there. I think for the skin tone, in general, I think it's mostly successful. I think the volumes could be pulled out a little bit more, in terms of there's a few areas where it feels a little bit flat. It also feels to me a little bit not having quite enough life in there. You've got sort of your shadow tones have got some purples and blues in them, but there's not too much red. You've got an overall quite pinkish skin tone, but just some more sort of reds in the shadows, sort of particularly on the face. You're lacking that life. It comes out almost a little bit sort of ashen, which I don't think is the sort of goal in mind there. It's just putting a little bit more of your highlights there, pulling those volumes out a little bit more, and working some more life in, which is usually most easily done with sort of adding some reds or red beiges, sort of glazing into the shadows, and into some of the midtones. A really nice sort of way to get that life in there without sort of fiddling with your sort of skin tone too much. Sort of around things like around the knuckles as well. Anywhere where sort of the skin would be sort of more likely to have sort of blood vessels close to it. Sort of this area of the face tends to have quite a lot of red in it as well. And sort of the shadow that it looks like you've sort of painted on the shadow on the arms to be like the cast shadow from the gun, and you've done those quite blue, quite desaturated, which not necessarily wrong, you know, but for an artistic interpretation of reality tends to make it look, as I say, that little bit ashy. But overall, I think it's a nice piece. I think, as I say, we can see that you can do the volumetric highlighting from the trousers, but particularly on a piece where there's so much skin showing, the skin kind of becomes the focus and the thing you want to be showing off. So it could have maybe deserved just a little bit more time spent on it. But overall, I think it's a nice piece. Jim?
Yeah, much agreed. More life, definitely needs more life in the face. Maybe some stubble around the chin, but it does look deliciously well groomed in in the hair. So it's kind of, I don't know what the story is here. Is he knackered from a battle, or is he posing for like Men's Health? I couldn't really decide, but I thought, because you know there is a massive opportunity for it on the skin. You've done a lovely job with it on the torso, arms and face, as Alex said, need more life in them. But you could maybe also scratches, bruises, dirt, if you wanted to, and maybe not. Maybe he's posing for Men's Health and is fine figure of a man and just simply showing off. And by that hairdo, very well slicked and groomed. I should probably suggest it doesn't need it. So, yeah, there you go, Kings. Matt.
Yeah, pants are great, boots great. not much else going on in the fig apart from the skin, so could have more attention there. But again, it's kind of like meant to be historical. Maybe it's not meant to be as dramatic. But at the same time, like look at how bright this highlight is inside of my head, and I'm just in normal light, and my nose as well. So he could definitely have a deeper shadow on the right side of his face, like here, because he's facing away from the light, and then a sharp light along here where there's like the bone, because your face is like there's actually a plane here and a plane there, to kind of bring it out. And that would help with things. It's weird that he has no body hair. I'm not sure if I like it or not. Like he looks like he's like waxed fully through. It would be very hard to kind of fake it on. But like stuff like his belly button should probably have a highlight on it because there's no hair there, it would catch the light because it is a like a rim like that, which you wouldn't normally see unless you like wax there, I suppose. But yeah, it's a really good looking piece, and that's all I have to say, really. Go on, mine next. I have to scroll down.
Yeah, there
Oh,
we go.
Gary. Yeah, Gary Hassani. What I did right, what I did wrong. Okay, well, you painted your model. There you go. That's right. There's no right or wrong way of painting anything. This is art. It's not like, I don't know, engineering. It's not going to collapse and kill a bunch of civilians if you don't design it a certain way. So if it makes you happy, you've done it right. All I can tell you is what I like about it and what I don't like about it. So that's what I'm going to do. I really like the blue to orange contrast in the weapon. I think that's a really interesting take on it. I don't. It's like a kind of stylized sort of NMM power weapony looking thing. Don't know if it's meant to be like orange power going through it or if it's rusty or whatever, but it looks good. And the green color of the armor is also very interesting as a base color. Think it's maybe like is it whatever Horace's guys were that color? I don't know, but it's a cool looking kind of intermediate green blue kind of thing, and I like that. Um, I don't like the orange, um, or red sort of elements on it as much, and not the like fluorescent green either, because you've kind of got like your scheme is kind of blue green and yellow, and then you've also got orange and a very different kind of because blue, green, and green are kind of notionally different colors. Like that fluorescent green is very different to what you have there. So I think maybe just I like having very limited palettes. If you like having it like this, that's right for you. Also the cape, it's got quite glossy shadows, which is going to trigger Jim in 2 minutes. So I'm just going to get out here ahead of that. And I kind of like it. Looks like it's got this kind of spatter pattern to it, but it looks very like you dusted it with an airbrush or a rattle can, and that is what has created that pattern. It's nice to have texture, but like anyone who paints miniatures can look at it and be like, "Oh, well, I know what that is," so it doesn't necessarily look like an illusion of reality. The decal on his arm looks great. His right shoulder, it looks like super awesome. It's super well bedded down. It looks like really professionally kind of done. Um, and I do something with the sand on the base because it just doesn't look like it looks unpainted. Like so, even just you can use the natural tone of the sand, but if you have like a wash to run in and outline everything, because it makes the model look small because he looks like he's standing on real sand because we can tell that that is in fact real sand, not like gravel, like sand. In The Simpsons, gotta paint horses to look like cows for film. It's like that. Sand looks like gravel in miniatures, so you need to shade it as if it is gravel so that it's like casting a bit of shadow on itself. Sand wouldn't actually do that, but that's because there's no room in between the sand grains because they're so small. Here, if they're all 50 times, they're all supposed to be 50 times bigger than there. And so that's what I like and what I don't like. But what's right and what's wrong is a matter for someone else to decide.
Um, yeah, exactly that. It's there is no sort of objective right or wrong. Um, just what I think is right and wrong, for my opinion, which other people are free to disagree with. So for me, the biggest thing that to me stands out as again not necessarily wrong, but sort of distracting to me is that you've got two very different styles of painting, sort of at a juxtaposition with each other. So the armor, the sort of greenish turquoisey armor, and the metal trim around that is painted very Games Workshop flat color with a recess shade and an edge highlight. But then you go around to the back, and the cloak is painted volumetrically. Neither one is right or wrong, and even his sort of like jump pack or backpack or special lunchbox on his back is painted again quite volumetrically. So there's no right or wrong way to highlight and shade, but having sort of those two different sort of styles on the same figure for different materials feels a little bit sort of confusing to the eye. It makes it essentially it makes it obvious that it has been painted, whereas in the silliest way to phrase it, as I say, it sounds almost hyperbolic to the point of absurdity. When we paint things, the best painted models look like they just are that, rather than they've been painted to be that. So this kind of suspends that, sort of breaks that suspension of disbelief. What I like, I like the color palette in general. I really like the sort of the blue and that sort of blue green sort of balance. I'm not sure, you know, about like Matt said about that bright red. I think the orange works because you've got these golden bone colors which balance quite well. But the splatterings of that almost fluorescent green and that dark sort of amaranth type reddy orange, they feel a little bit sort of out of place for me. They're sort of vaguely balanced, so it almost works. It's just there's each individual one of those sort of colors is okay, but it feels like you've got too many colors in your color scheme for it to be cohesive and not look a little bit sort of busy to the eye. But overall, I think it's relatively cleanly painted as well, which is often, the biggest thing for me, at the very least, when I look at a model is it clean or is there overspill? There's a few places where I wouldn't necessarily say it's overspill, but it could be tidied up with a little recess shade. But for the most part, it's cleanly painted, and that's what's very very important to making a model look crisp and look nice. So yeah, that's sort of my like and don't like. Jim?
Yeah, pretty much the same story. Just defining things a little bit more sharply with recess shades, like around some of these gold trims on the armor pad there, and on this handle, there's some definite texture there that could be picked out with some shading, and around these trims on the ankles as well, and like the armor panels on things like the boots and up on the chest plate. So yeah, just defining that'll help set it out a little bit better. Just define the shapes. As previously mentioned about the color scheme, I agree with all that. I think he did a pretty decent job of the blade, like the NMM blade. So you've got some nice shadows and reflections, good level of contrast in it, a variation of size and placement. That's good. Maybe just a little bit too blue, but cause it's not like a blatant power sword. That's just a sharp edge. Yeah, really really good job with it. Just might be just a tiny bit too blue for me. And then yeah, as previously mentioned, wash, dry, brush the sand, simples, and that'll make it look 10 times better already. So yeah, there you go, Gary. Hope that helps. All right, let's slide on up. Oh, this was an awesome submission, Sergey. Would love some CNC on this. Started painting recently, trying to figure out what it takes to paint display level minis. I don't know what you mean by recently. Doesn't look like you've been learning to paint recently. This looks really good. Really, really good. What did I have for this? So to push it up a level, smoothing out transitions and going up to higher highlights on the top of the model. So where you have sort of the edge highlights on the armor panels, it looks like you've got a specular highlight there as well on the top of his forward, bonk, just there. Smooth transitions out, and I find a really nice easy way to do this on Space Marines is by dry brushing, but that's not the only way to do it. You can layer, you can glaze, you can wet blend, whatever, but I just find that the shapes of them are really really small and very, very dry brush works beautifully for these shapes and these models. So maybe give that a crack. Nice work on the texturing in the cloak. It's just a little bit stark sometimes where it goes from textured to not textured. So again, glazing will be your friend there. Love what you did with the energy coming out of the sword, by the way. That looks awesome. I think that's like hairs out of a brush or something that have been painted. But that looks super, super cool. So nice work there. What else did I have? There was verdigris on the Agilia, which is painted gold. So that's a bit of a juxtaposition there because gold doesn't verdigris like that. It's not selling as bronze. It's too kind of looks like a very, very cold, bright gold. So shading therefore would be best if it was brown, which it is actually, to be fair. But just lose the verdigris, or paint it a darker bronze color and then keep the verdigris. Whichever way, it's kind of the same story on the chain as well. Didn't really sell that it was copper or bronze. It's looking more like gold, so fix either one. Nice tones on the leather, but you could add some more scritching and scratching to it and some general highlights as well. That's just kind of flat color edge highlighted, which is correct, but you can also paint the volumes in as well, like where the leather's folded up here, that would be brighter, and then where it's curving up here, so shadows would collect in this section here and it become brighter towards the bottom, and then obviously you'd need to separate it very sharply from the metal end. But yeah, just pushing that a little bit further, and then cleaning up perhaps the free hands. So you've got a bit here on the shin and a little bit up here. I think that might be a transfer, I'm not sure. If it is a transfer and you can see the edge of it, hit it with a gloss varnish, then with a matte varnish afterwards once it's dried. That will sit it in very, very nicely. Good work on the red, I thought. That was quite good. You could push the folds of the cape a little bit higher and add some texture there if you want to. You textured the front tabard. You could do it. So maybe add some to the back. That would be super cool. And like pick out some of the edges a little bit brighter. And yeah, there's a little bit more freehand there just to tidy up, go back in with your mid-tone and just clean up those edges, and that'll look loads better. But yeah, that's it, Sergey. I hope that helps. Matt?
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything about the paint job. I really like it. Jim said loads. But just in terms of like what it takes to take it to display painting, like that's just what is display painting. Like, it's not even me. Some people would just be like, oh, it's just like better painted. Or is it, it's just basically means that the model's going to sit on a shelf. So like stuff like having this sword with the diddly bits of lightning coming out of it looks great. Got to be really annoying to do your army that way. So that kind of makes it display. So don't be thinking too much about like display automatically just means it's better painted. It tends to also mean that it's painted for the purposes of looking at it on its own. Like that's what I suppose the technical definition of it is. And it's entirely fine. Like if you're only starting off painting, this looks great. This can sit in your shelf and it can be a display model. And then like in a year's time you can take it down and now it's your standard gaming model. And then whatever is going up on the display shelf is going to be a little bit better just by virtue of putting in the practice and the hours. So great work at whatever standard you're going for.
Yeah, I was thinking a similar thing. I mean, Jim covered basically everything in terms of the model and the sort of nitpicking the painting. So, if you were to ask me what it takes to paint display level minis, the only answer that I think you need, anyone can give any hundreds of answers about what you can do in terms of techniques to make it display. It needs to be NMM or it needs to be, this level of cleanliness or this many hours of effort. And to be honest, the only answer that I think what it takes to paint a display level mini, if we choose the definition to be a high level paint job, again, a display level is just a display level mini is just a mini that you've painted to your best quality to sit on your display shelf. But if we're talking about sort of if we use that to mean high level, the answer is time. It's going in. It's that whole spending 80% of your time to do the last 20% of the model. It's that sort of being extra delicate, going back in where maybe your edge highlights have come out a bit sort of chunkier or less tidy than you'd like, and going back in with the base tone and tidying it up, it's taking the time to sort of go add that extra level of contrast. You've done, you maybe, if you do 5, 6, 7 different levels of value for your highlights, every time your highlight's getting smaller, it's not that much more time to add an extra one in. It's taking that time to sit back and look at it and think, how can I improve this? That's it. It sounds a little bit sort of wishy-washy, but display level painting is about sort of sitting back and thinking, how can I make this better, and self-critiquing and saying, what can I do? Where can I go back? It's deciding, I'm not finished. I'm just stopping with your model. And in terms of specifics here, I think the only thing that I can really say that it is the easiest way is cleanliness, and you're generally clean, but just tidying things up, and sort of just more contrast is the easy one. But overall, I think it's a nice piece, and sort of reflecting on sort of what Matt said about sort of what display painting is, and sort of that idea of just spend. You want to be painting for a display level piece, if we are taking that to mean competition level or high level to sit on your shelf and make people go wow. It's painting until you get bored, really, and that's when you stop and put it aside and say, I'm done with you. Maybe I'll come back, maybe I won't, because you worked on it that much, but still having fun. If you're painting and not having fun, you're doing something wrong. But yeah, really nice piece. And I wouldn't say it looks like you started painting recently. Then we move up to Jim Norfolk. Larger scale with TMM, but requests, so no choice. Fair enough. Variety of gold, highly polished steel, sky earth reflections, interference in places. So, looking at it, I like it a lot. I think the thing that stands out to me is the most sort of eye-catching is this transition you've got on the cloak behind. I think it's clearly meant to be like or at least I'm hoping it's clearly meant to be a transition of the actual color of the fabric, not just some super extreme highlights and shadows there. Hence the sort of popping out on the ridges and things even more than the general sort of tone of it, almost like a night sky type effect.
There
Is
it
what
is.
I'm getting there.
There it is.
Which I think is really successful. I think you could maybe, in a few places, just on the top where you've got that really bright color, just pop those top ridges there a little bit more. But this is a really good example of what we've been saying throughout, of your folds in your fabric don't need to be super dark. Just that little bit darker is enough to make it read as a fold of fabric. I think in general people do fabric, unless the fabric that you're painting is silk or velvet or something like that, you're not likely to get super extreme highlights and shadows. Fabrics are soft for a reason. And I think you've done a really good job of rendering that material as what it's meant to be. The blade of his spear, I'm not quite fully sold on, in terms of, I think you could just pop the highlights a little bit more just to make it work. Just have that glint. But overall, I think it's, the reflections and things are nice there. I think you've got, as you say, it's TMM throughout, but with that sort of blue over it. I think sort of from the top, and you've got a little bit of sort of dark colours and browns from the bottom as well, in places, which works. It's sort of that cheaty sort of sky earth, not quite painting it chrome, but going with it to make your TMM look more interesting, and I think it works for that. I think maybe the blue is a little bit too brighter blue, just in terms of, like, I look at the lion's head in this sort of front on photo, and very blue. It is reflecting the sky, but the sky is very far away, so maybe not quite so hyper saturated and bright a blue. But again, that's a preference thing. You can get away with that as just saying it's stylistic, and it fits with the piece. But it's just for my personal taste, it's just that little bit too blue.
Too strong.
And the other one that for me, I think your white fabric could have a little bit more sort of contrast in it. We've said it many a time. The sort of light whites and things are quite hard. I think I can't tell if you're going for a sort of on his front, this sort of bit of fabric that's there is meant to be sort of white with cold shadows, or if it's meant to be a very, 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 very pale blue. So I think just if it's meant to be that super pale blue, slightly more shadows. If it's meant to be white with cold shadows, slightly more highlights, just to sort of make it read a little bit more obviously. Because it's that case of it falls a little bit between the two to my eye. And the one thing that I'm not the biggest fan of is the shadows on the little flag, where
Ah,
you've got them very, very, very sort of maroony in there. And yes, cold highlights tends to equal warm shadows. I think you've gone just a little bit too far there, in that cold highlights doesn't necessarily mean warm shadows; it's warmer shadows. So I think it's just that little bit too sort of almost too warm that it's to the point that it's eye catching, and doesn't quite feel like a shadow to me. But overall, very clean, very nice. It's particularly over the. I was sort of scrolling through your Instagram earlier when I was sort of looking at the models. I think your last couple from about the time from your sort of the Ogre Myrmidon you did before this, and the little not so much on the like polar bear warrior kind of guy, but particularly in the Abaddon. I think you're really starting to sort of settle into a distinctive and really sort of identifiable style, which is always a very
oh,
nice thing.
that's a very nice thing to hear. Thank you.
But anything from you, Matt?
Yeah, loads. This is cool. It really reminds me of Warcraft, not Warhammer, but the old like game
Bingo.
Warcraft. All the knights in it looked really like this really
All
shiny
my
metal
time.
that's really blue looking. Because they were blue faction. Um, I really like the NMM with the spear, or the TMNT is what it's called when it's NMM and TMM.
Cheat MM.
Definitely in that order. And it's got this cool kind of like illustrated look to it. But it is slightly out of sorts with the rest of the armor because if you look at like the actual physical reflected highlights on his helmet, they are brighter than on his spear. So it makes it look like there is like different light, or it's a different material. Like if you told me it's meant to be like I don't know some sort of like glass or something that rather than metal. But I think they both look really good. I like the pennant. It's Abaddon's skirt. I recognize it, or his cloak. I recognized it immediately. I was like, that's a Jim Norfolk fabric. Because to me it reads as it is silk or some sort of very glossy fabric, and then when it gets into the shadows, it's actually reflecting like something else. So I think that's pretty cool, and it's an element of your style, so the signature bit. Um, on the TMM in general, I think the lion's head and his shield looks like excellent because it's like got this perfect like I think of the way it's positioned as well. It's perfectly catching the light in a certain area, and you've kind of enhanced that. And it's got these like gold reflections, like the lights hit the gold and bounce off it and then bounce back, and like that looks really good. I think the shoulder pads not quite as good, but I think that's just inherent with shoulder pads that are like this. Like actual they don't that doesn't make any sense. Like actual shoulder pads have the with like decorations have them here in this plane. They don't have them on top sticking in because you wouldn't be able to see shit all. And then the blue on the shield, I really like the kind of glossy blue. Like it's almost like NMM blue. It looks really good. But I think the secondary highlight is a little bit maybe too bright and too linear where it is because it looks like there is a light shining there, and I don't know what it would be, and for it to be such a like a strip kind of thing, um, if you just made it not go so close to white, um, that might help it out if it was just a little bit darker because it's nearly as bright as like it looks like a second light source if that makes sense to me.
Mm.
And then the lettering on the base rim is like super good. How'd you do that?
Freehand.
Just freehand. It's fucking
Skill.
ace. You should be a sign writer.
It's freehanded.
But I'm waiting for
it's
really,
metallics.
really small signs.
Yeah. I did want it smaller, but I was running out of time. To be honest, it had to land
So the
for the
swirly
birthday.
things at the end with the super fine lines look great.
Ah, thanks, man.
Look great.
Cool.
Cool.
Where are we now? Then are we out of? Who's up next?
Robin Hagblom. So I think it's me. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
me.
It is. Yeah.
So Robin, he's got this display level dude on a horse. Went for less vibrant magenta than before because we've seen a few of these. They all look phenomenal. I have to say, especially for it's worth noting these are part of a larger force as well. So, um, they're like an extremely high standard given that. Let me just get my notes quickly. I think the helmet on the right looks better. You asked about that, did you? Maybe it was there before. Yeah, I think it looks better on the right. Um, just because it kind of follows the line. Like it looks like just the sun is literally hitting it there, and then there's a glare coming off and going down. On the left hand side, obviously the feather's kind of in the way, but just the way I think it's to do with like that one of them is going up at this angle, and then the one by her eyes is going at a slightly different angle. It looks to me like maybe it should be more vertical on that side, but I prefer the right. Is her right? Is what I'm saying is the answer there. I like the toned down magenta. I think it makes it a bit easier to look at, but I think it would be nice to have some of that really punchy, super saturated magenta in some of the upper areas, like on the feather on the horse's head, and like her feather as well, just to show like where the light hits directly. That is the color, like the true color requires a lot of light to shine through, especially given that you've got your reflections of the magenta on all of your dude's weapons and armor and stuff. Like a magenta that is that dull, to my mind, wouldn't bounce off so much light that you can see it like reflected onto objects around. And I really like on the spear as well. You've got like a kind of a yellow bounce light, which I'm guessing it's the gold, but of someone else, but it's a bit more toned down. But I think that just looks really good as a kind of interference color that is just there, kind of filling up space. And I think you nailed the volumes on the scale as well. The way like the scales are highlighted and the whole volume of it's highlighted, which is not an easy thing to do. And I think you've got it spot on. Like the way on her arm, there's like a bit here, and then it goes to shadow and it comes back, and then the way it's kind of more vertical on the kind of skirt thing she's got coming down over her horse. And I think as well, like a lot of this is to do with like the figure choice. Like this figure is letting you show off your skills a lot better than some of the ones we reviewed previously, like the dude with a sword like this and stuff. Just because it's more open and it's got the elements distributed more evenly, and it kind of isn't fighting with you, like I think some of the previous ones were. So this is super awesome stuff. Great work.
Yeah, a lot of the same things to say, to be honest. I mean, we've said it before. When we've been sort of looking at some of your models. Your gold NMM in particular is really rich, just really nice. I love the color palette you've got going there. Sort of to not harp on the same things that Matt said, on sort of improving, sort of aiming for display level. At display level, I'd like to see some wood grain texture on the wood. You know, you've put a lot of effort into a lot of places to the point that the wood with where it's more or less just highlighted brown feels a little bit unloved, especially since it's quite a similar brown to the tones you've got for the horse. Just some texture there to break it up and make it obviously a different material would be really nice. I'd agree with Matt on his opinions on the helmet as well. Her right hand side helmet with the glint looks nicer to me, since you asked specifically. And the other one for me, if we're thinking about display level, with how shiny and glossy a lot of things are here, you've done the horse's mane really nice and the horse's tail really nice, but the rest of the horse to me feels really kind of flat. They are horses I find horses and mounted sort of figures really hard to paint. because to get cell contrast and things with tone, horses are completely covered in fur, so and it's quite glossy fur as well. So where you've got sort of highlights, I'd like to see some more sort of almost glint reflections along the muscle tones, because horses are so muscular but so sort of kind of almost glossy in the way they look. If you ever look at photos of horses, a lot of the time, particularly when they're sort of running and a bit sweaty as well, they're just really glossy. So it just feels a little bit too matte almost for me on the fur. But that's a minor thing, a nitpicky thing. But you've asked us to critique you to a display level, so yeah, you can't complain about getting nitpicked. The toned down magenta looks a lot nicer as well. I think in general, this whole sort of force is really nice from what we've seen before, and it's been really rewarding. I think from our perspective as well, to see sort of as you've made adjustments to what you've done going forward, how they've improved as figures and sort of the paint jobs and things. It's really exciting to see. So here's to the next one.
Yeah, agree with all that, especially the helmet reflection, as previously mentioned. I think the same thing. The only thing for me that's not been mentioned is the brown of the horse, the brown of the bow, the brown of the mane, and the brown of the tail are all very samey. So differentiating the browns a little bit, like the bow's a good opportunity to switch up colours. Elves, I think, quite famously had white bows. I don't know if that would maybe fit your scheme, or just something else, not the same brown as the horse. When it's right next to the horse, you're losing it a little bit. So just maybe varying something. But yeah, other than that, stunning work with the metal reflections, as has already been said, etc. So beautiful stuff, Robin. Send us a picture of these all finished when they're all in, because we've loved watching this one come along. Thank you very much indeed. Right, next up is Nick Allen. Painted this as well as I'm able for a competition, but got nowhere. Would appreciate some pointers on what the weakest areas are, and therefore where to focus on improvement. So don't be disheartened by the competition thing, not getting anywhere. If you get a chance next time, speak to judges, see if you can find out what they dinged you for. Most of the time they're very chatty and more than happy to help. So try that. I thought the problem with this was perhaps that it's got a bit too much blue in the composition, so it's difficult for the eye to really settle anywhere. It's cool how you've used the blue to bring down into a white and bring the attention towards the face, but it's not really, nothing's particularly brighter about this area of the model. So all of the gold is kind of, and the brown is sort of highlighted pretty reasonably the same, as is the blue. So mixing up it's just a very straight line of blue, which is technically nothing wrong with that, but there's an opportunity for red here because you've got a great big red inside of this cape skirt jacket tunic thing. So it's nice that you've got red up here, but I just don't think it's enough. I think the balance of it is a little bit off. The way you've painted it, it's very clean, it's very crisp, it's very nice. You've got a nice separation. The blending on this tiny little gems that you've got on the front is beautiful, so that's all really good. Very dark separation. Some of it's a little bit thick, like around this bracelet and around these tassely things. Nice cod piece, by the way, sir. Beautiful piece of highlighting on the inlays in the cloak, so that looks absolutely stunning. Great work there. I like the enamel on the blade. There's lots of things you've done right, lots and lots. But blue headdress, blue sword, blue chest piece, blue opal thing in the middle, blue legs, blue feet. It's kind of a soft sculpt around the feet as well, so possibly not the greatest sculpt in terms of going for a competition. It's a good sort of open stance, so that's a nice choice, but it just does look a little bit soft at the bottom. I don't think it's doing you any favours. Let's have a look at the back. Amazing contrast on the metals and on the black. And everything really. Contrast is really nice on it. So I think it's a compositional thing that they may have dinged you for, because I don't think cleanliness and contrast is really an issue, to be honest. So what do you think of the composition, Matt?
Yeah, I think first of all, don't get disheartened. Like, this is really good, and as we said before, where you get in a competition actually doesn't necessarily mean much. Depending. Take it always with a grain of salt. But Jim kind of touched on it. Like, my biggest critique of this model is the model that you picked for the competition. Like it's kind of fun that it's this really old like Eldar Harlequin and you've done it in a kind of slightly updated version of that style, but the proportions on it are completely messed up. Look at the size of his hands compared to his torso and like the fingers. The handle of the sword is so big that they had to add in extra bits of the finger to make it wrap around because it's like the thickness of like a giant can of beer. And like it's very hard to do convincing NMM on a blade that is probably this thickness of like a 4x2 plank of wood in reality. And like then his hair is just like nonsense in terms of like you couldn't have a thing of hair like it's because it's made of metal that it has to be like that. And the kind of soft sculpt in the foot. So like every element that I look at, I'm like, that looks really good. That looks really good. That looks really good. And then I look at the model and just be like, it looks like nonsense because the sculpt itself has no real realism to the proportions, and you've done a really good job of painting each bit with like realistic lights and shadows, and then it falls apart when we look at the whole. It's kind of like an uncanny valley type of thing. So I'd say like the strongest piece overall for me is the NMM handle of the sword, that really cool like brass knuckle guard and everything on it. It looks super cool with the red interference color. So like next time you go into a competition, get a Stormcast and just paint it all like that, and it will have a tabard and paint the tabard blue or whatever color you want because you're just playing to your strengths, and you know it's just going to be much easier for you. And this one, obviously, like you enjoyed it and it's a classic model, and you put a great amount of effort into every individual element of it. But people are going to look at it still and go like, "Yeah, something kind of off about it." Then it's not to do with the way you painted it. Whereas they'll look at that Stormcast and just be like, "That is sick ass NMM." There you go. That would be my advice.
Yeah, again, I have to agree. The model's not doing you any favors. Like, there's an old sort of myth about Golden Demon that to win you have to paint the most recent model, and it's not necessarily true. We can look at the most recent Golden Demon to see that. The UK one, so a lot of very old models got very good places. But what is true is that the more modern models are, and the newer models are better sculpts, and this is a terrible sculpt. So you've basically you've gone to a competition with a handicap that you've imposed on yourself. So feel know what concerns about how it's been painted. It's like, for example, for me, a weak area is the NMM on the actual sword blade itself. But a sword blade like that is basically impossible to make look good in NMM. So you the fact that it doesn't properly read as metal is not you. You've ticked all the boxes. Your contrast is there. Your midtones are there. Your edge highlights are there. Your glint highlights are there. Your reflected colors are there. It's just the shapes just don't work for NMM because of the sculpt. Um, the blue on his legs. The blending on that is fantastic. It's really smooth. The volumes are paid attention to really well. But the way the fabric's been shaped and the way that his kneecaps are literal squares of metal on top of his leg doesn't read properly as a leg with a kneecap and things. It's or a piece of armor underneath these tights or whatever it's intended to be. And that's the thing as well, is it's such a messy, soft, sort of mushy sculpt that you can't quite tell what things are meant to be. So honestly, the only real piece of advice I've got going on to future competitions is pick a newer model. Um, you know, these kinds of old models only really, it's such an old model. It only really would suit the old Games Workshop style of painting because that's the only way you can make the details look nice without them sort of feeling too realistic for what is a stylized model. Painting wise, compositionally, yeah, maybe there's a bit too much blue. The red on his cloak is a bit unbalanced. The sort of transition on his headpiece down to the white. My eye focused on the white, not the face. You've done the trick of trying to pull lightness into the face, but got a bit too bright with it. But those are minor things. That's the sort of stuff that separates first, second, third, not gets nothing compared to get something. So I would not be too concerned about your painting. You've got skill. You've got cleanliness, you've got technique, you've got quite advanced techniques in terms of making the gems look nice and making the NMM sell. Just pick a better model. um, yeah. Moving up now to Victor. Curse City model. Wanted to give a look on the of leather clothes. So, specifically on the leathers, I think you're moving in the right direction with them in terms of tones and things. But we need more weathering is the major thing here. A bit more variation of tone. So, you've got sort of on his belt here. You've got some scratching and weathering around the edges. It's not quite how leather weathers. It does weather more towards the edge, but where it cracks and things is where it's flexing. So I'd want to see scratches and cracks and weathering all the way along across it, just with more focus on the edges, and rather than sort of these sort of pale pastel sort of brown edge highlights, some more sort of tones and volumes there. I'd also leathers come in so many different tones. You've got a different tone for the gloves, but then his hat is the same as his belt, is the same as his cloak, is the same as sort of the strap on his weapon there, is the same as quite a few of the other leather areas. So mixing up the brown tones, even if you want to keep it harmonious, have one base brown and mix different colors that are already on your palette, or just if you're all brown and you're starting from a fresh, just pick a few nice different tones from your sort of paint selection and have that one base brown and create variations on the brown by mixing different various colors in. And that works really well. I've done that before for making lots of similar areas look cohesive and yet different, because it all sort of blends into one on the eye. You've got a few areas that stand out as different. The wood on the sort of handle of the gun thing, these sort of wooden stakes, and his gloves. Everything else is pretty much looks the same. So that'd be my biggest sort of critique. It's painted cleanly. Everything is defined. The metals are nice. You've got good sort of glints there and sort of shading there and things. But the leathers themselves are too samey between all of them, and not enough scratches, not enough weathering, and some maybe a bit more volumetric highlighting across the model as a whole. But honestly, it's not the sort of biggest deal because it is so cleanly painted. It reads quite well. You've got nice clean edge highlights, nice clean recess shades, so that the elements separate, but variation of color would give more separation. And that's the major thing to look at with the leathers. Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. With the leathers, most successful portion of it, I think, was the right hand holding the gun. That's the best piece. So you've put seems a lot more love and attention into doing that, and then some of the rest of it you can just tell it's just get the color on there, and you haven't given it the same level of attention. So that would really help if you paid that towards the whole thing. And then moving away from the leathers, because I think Alex covered it all. The metals, I think you could do with tidying up some of the edge highlights. They're a bit chunky, and I don't think it's supposed to be rusty, but in some places it kind of looks like it is, like this left shoulder pad. Like the way this highlight has been put on here doesn't really resolve in any way as to what's going on with the shape of it, if that makes sense. So you've proved that you can do it with, various other areas around the model. So, just pay a little bit more love and attention to the metals, I think, would really, really help as well. Matt?
Yeah, my only point would be actually about the base rather than the model. I'm not sure if anyone mentioned it, but it's very drab and samey and boring looking. So having some sort of moss growing around those stones, or having the stones be like a blue gray rather than they're almost like he's mostly in kind of browns and grays, and he's standing on kind of browns and grays, and it doesn't look as good as if you had it broken up. And it's kind of he's in a cursed city. Like there could be unnatural colors in it. There could be a big blood stain running across it. Just something to make it look more interesting because currently it's all basically the one color, and it's not as fun. And it's gray and brown are not interesting colors as well for it to be. So a bit of that I think would make the model overall look a lot better as well. So he kind of contrast with it too. Oh, last one. Michael Smith, OSL on the staff. Tried some TMM techniques before as well. Cool. So we got this some sort of cultist dude. I think the OSL looks quite well. It's understated, which is always how you want to go on your OSL. Usually less is more. It's not like the object source lighting is always weaker than the sunlight or whatever your main light is. Especially in the front view, the way there's that face and it's kind of you've done it on the inside of the horns, and that's naturally where it would be because they are shadowing themselves. So great work on that, and it kind of spreads out slightly, but not very much at all, which is correct given the kind of light setup you've shown the rest of him to be in. He's under a pretty strong light. It's not quite as good at the back, um, mostly because there isn't that kind of opportunity for shadow. You've done a little bit of it around the ring, but this has that issue where you have a big plume of fire and the sun is shining directly in it. And actually, when that happens, you can see through the fire because it's just a load of hot gas. And so there's no really good way of doing that. So I think you've done a pretty good job of it. You could make it be like more smoky or something instead if you wanted to, and have the green directly in the center. Sam Lenz has a really good video where he does that with this orc shaman. It's blowing smoke, and it's kind of the smoke is underlit from below. It looks class. So that's one way of kind of dealing with that issue. Other kind of pointers, I think the transition from his skin on his arm, not the extra tentacles he has under his arm. There's like it transitions from the blue kind of tentacly skin to his skin tone, but it's very abrupt and also like it's in like this much space, and also it's very much the same color as the tentacles. I think it'd look better if like that arm was only kind of the is all just the intermediate color between the tentacle and his skin tone because it hasn't fully kind of transformed. It looks a little bit like it's just that's just probably a personal thing. And then he has a lot of these holes in his robes. Games Workshop love adding holes to things, even if it make absolutely no sense why they would be there, just like floating like circular holes. Someone's going over the hole punch in the 41st millennium, sticking holes in his clothes when they're not looking. But some of them you have there's a shadow inside and it just goes to black as though there's a shadow and we can't see. And some of them it has like the purple on the back. You can see there's like purple inside the holes, which kind of makes it look like he's wearing two sets of robes and there's a hole in the outside one and we can see into it. So I'd pick one or the other. Like if you're gonna do it, definitely use a darker color on the inside, and then you can do a little highlight on the bottom as well, and that contrast will make the whole thing look darker and make it look more like a hull. Um, whereas otherwise it looks like a little bit weird. And then maybe on his top robe, it should actually be purple inside because he's got this hood, but it's a minor thing. They're like, yeah, just a little bit shading and a highlight and kind of sell that effect a bit more. I think he's pretty cool looking. He's got a fairly strong color palette, but it doesn't kind of read as super eye jarring for me. And he has that kind of siege cultist kind of feel of like greens, blues, and purples, which it should probably tie in well with the rest of your army or whatever you're using the piece for. So, good job.
Yeah, a lot of the same. To be honest, I think it's really nice paint. It's really smoothly painted. For the most part, I think the OSL works really well. I think if that was sort of the main focus of what you were trying to push, then you can consider this model a success, regardless of how the rest of it looks, because that looks very, very nice. You know, I think that sort of in terms of color palette, it works. That green is so bright, it sort of pulls a little bit of the attention up. It's kind of hard to balance out such a bright green, so that tends to be where we look at. But it's not the biggest issue if that was sort of what you were aiming for. And again, it comes down to if this is for an army, which it looks like it sort of is in terms of the basing and things. You can get away with that as again that sort of standard bearer can have a big thing that draws attention, even if it pulls attention away from the face of the model, where you tend to say is the focal point. You're really with a standard bearer like that in an army. You're making that thing the attention drawer of the army, so you can kind of get away with it. In terms of the model in general, I think your contrast could be a little bit higher on things like the blue tentacles feel very flat, and at the back, the purple cloak has some areas of sort of highlights and shading, but I feel like you could maybe push that up a little bit more volumetrically. But it's not too sort of, it works in that sort of understated Games Workshop style. The metals, I really like how you've done them. That sort of relatively dull entire plane with just the sharp edge highlights that are super metallic works. Again, it's really nice in that sort of Games Workshop style you've sort of hit on here, which works really well. In terms of the basing, I like the way you've done the snow. I like the way you've done the tufts with a bit of sort of wash in the bottom of them and some of the snow settled on the top. Not entirely sure why you've got sort of all that blue around it. If it's meant to be sort of ice, why there'd be that much ice there with a big rock in the middle of it and grass growing on it doesn't really work. But why it would be earth that blue, also not entirely sure on what's sort of going on there. Um, but it's sort of you can it's Warhammer. Things don't really need to always make sense if it looks cool. So I think you're okay in that regard. I would just say he's snowy. I'd like to see some. He's in a snowy environment. I'd like to see some snow in his boots or a darkening of the uh, cloak at the bottom that shows it's been dragging through sort of wet snow. Something just to sort of make it look less like he's suddenly just fallen out of the sky and dropped into this environment. That little bit of weathering there would really help to tie the two together. But yeah, I think it's a really nice piece, really cleanly painted. Jim?
Not much left for me now, is there, lads? Just one thing that's not already been said, just a compositional choice. Maybe if the focus is supposed to be the head, maybe don't paint the head black if that's the only thing on the model that's black. I didn't really get why that would be the case. Lovely maroon coloured robe, bright blue colours everywhere, green. Why is the head black? I didn't really get that part. Maybe if that was like the magenta as well, it would upset me less. But yeah, I just didn't really get why. That's where you want to draw the focus, and it's hard enough anyway, as has been said with the blue tentacle and the green fire. That was my only other observation, but very very clean, very very crispy, brilliant OSL, well done, and fantastic work on the base as well. So those are my positive points. Well done, Michael. Thank you very much. Over to you, Matt, to see us out of here.
Cool. Yes, that's going to close us out. I nearly forgot because we were a week late, but we have to say a big congratulations to Mr. Steve Smith for
Yes, well done,
taking home
Steve.
silver in the Golden Demon vehicles category.
Well done, Steve.
Which I believe he said in the review was his. Was it 90% or 95%?
It wasn't. It wasn't 100 for sure. Yeah.
It wasn't 100 anyway. We know that. So
Maybe.
Steve,
Maybe he would have got gold.
Yeah.
first, but definitely not the last for that, man. He's quite the talent. Thanks a million to everyone for submitting. Entries will be open for this month already, which is vehicles again. So no pressure. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks very much.